An innocent millionaire is sentenced to pay $988 million and faints in court until a poor 7-year-old girl reveals the truth and leaves everyone shocked. Before we unfold this journey, press like and share where you're from and your favorite life lesson. The gavel struck with devastating finality, echoing through the packed Manhattan courtroom like a death knell. 26-year-old Marcus Wellington III felt the world tilt beneath his Italian leather shoes as Judge Morrison's voice thundered through the suffocating silence. The court finds the defendant liable for damages in the amount of $988 million. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His vision blurred, the mahogany-paneled walls seeming to close in around him. Behind him, he could hear his mother Eleanor's sharp intake of breath, his father's muttered curse. The media gallery erupted in chaos, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions that sounded like distant thunder in his ringing ears. "This is a travesty of justice," his attorney, Jonathan Pierce, was saying, but the words felt hollow, meaningless against the crushing weight of the verdict. Marcus gripped the defendant's table, his knuckles white against the polished wood. 3 years ago, he'd been the golden boy of Wellington Industries, fresh from Harvard Business School with a master's degree in environmental engineering, ready to take on the world with his innovative green technology initiatives. His revolutionary water filtration patents were going to change everything, make industrial waste processing not just cleaner, but profitable. Now, accused of environmental fraud that had allegedly poisoned an entire community in upstate New York, he was facing financial ruin that would destroy not just him, but generations of his family's legacy. The irony was devastating. The very technology he'd developed to protect the environment was being blamed for destroying it. The plaintiff's attorney, a shark-faced man named Davidson, was already addressing the press outside the courtroom windows. "Justice has been served for the families of Millbrook Valley who trusted Wellington Industries with their health and their futures. Mr. Wellington's reckless pursuit of profit has cost this community everything." But Marcus knew the truth that no one would believe. He was innocent. The environmental reports had been falsified, yes, but not by him. Someone had systematically destroyed his life, his reputation, and now his future. The evidence against him was overwhelming, perfect in its damning completeness. Too perfect, he'd told his lawyers, but they dismissed his suspicions as desperation. As the weight of nearly $1 billion in damages crashed down on him, Marcus felt his legs give way. His mother's scream echoed in his ears as he collapsed, the courtroom spinning into darkness, and the terrible certainty that his life as he knew it was over, forever. The last coherent thought he had was wondering how someone could have orchestrated such an elaborate frame job, and why they hated him enough to destroy an entire community just to ruin him. When consciousness finally slipped away, Marcus Wellington III had no idea that salvation would come from the most unexpected source, a 7-year-old girl who remembered kindness in the rain. When Marcus regained consciousness 53 minutes later, the courtroom had largely emptied, except for family, legal teams, and a few persistent reporters. A paramedic was checking his pulse while his mother Eleanor held his hand, her usually perfect composure shattered by tears that had smeared her carefully applied mascara. "Easy, son, doctor." Matthews, the court-appointed physician, said quietly, "You've had quite a shock. Blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, 180 over 120. We need to get you to a hospital for observation." Marcus struggled to sit up on the small cot they'd brought in, waving away the oxygen mask. "I'm fine. I need to think, need to figure out what happens next." Udet. The reality of his situation crashed back like a tidal wave. $988 million. The number felt astronomical, impossible. His entire trust fund, built over 5 generations of Wellington success, was worth maybe $300 million. The family's liquid assets wouldn't cover even a third of the judgment. "We'll appeal," his father, Marcus Wellington II, said with the steel in his voice that had made him a feared negotiator in corporate boardrooms. But even he looked older somehow, the weight of potential financial ruin aging him before Marcus's eyes. At 62, he'd built the Wellington Empire into a Fortune 500 company, and now he was watching it crumble because of his son's supposed crimes. "With what money, Dad?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll freeze everything. The company, the accounts, the properties, everything's going to be tied up in litigation for years. Even if we win on appeal, the legal fees alone will bankrupt us." Eleanor squeezed his hand tighter, her diamond wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent lights. At 52, she'd never faced real hardship, having married into the Wellington fortune at 23 after a whirlwind romance. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the summer home in the Hamptons, the charity galas and society functions, all of it would disappear. But worse than losing their lifestyle was watching her son's dreams turn to ash. Jonathan Pierce approached cautiously, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled from running his hands through it. At 48, he was one of Manhattan's most successful corporate defense attorneys, but this case had tested even his considerable skills. "Marcus, I need you to think carefully about that night 3 years ago. The night the contamination allegedly occurred. You said there was something wrong with the security system, remember? Walk me through it again." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to focus through the fog of shock and the lingering effects of whatever medication the paramedic had given him. The night came back in fragments, working late in his office on the new filtration system designs, the security alarm going off and then mysteriously resetting, the cleaning crew that had been different than usual. "I remember being frustrated because the alarm kept malfunctioning," Marcus said slowly. "And there was a new cleaning supervisor, not Mrs. Rodriguez like usual, someone I didn't recognize, but the details are still fuzzy." "That's because you're trying too hard," came a small voice from the courtroom door. Everyone turned to see a figure that made no sense in this adult world of corporate litigation and financial ruin. What they saw defied all expectation. A small figure stood in the doorway, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with tangled brown hair pulled back in a crooked ponytail and wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. Her sneakers had holes in the toes, her jeans were patched at the knees, and her faded pink t-shirt was at least 2 sizes too small. But her dark eyes held a wisdom and determination that seemed far beyond her years. "Excuse me," she said in a clear, steady voice that carried surprising authority despite her size. "I need to talk to Marcus Wellington. It's very important." Court security moved forward immediately, but Judge Morrison, who had been preparing to leave for his chambers, held up his hand. Something about the child's demeanor had caught his attention. In 43 years on the bench, he'd developed an instinct for when something truly unusual was about to unfold, and this little girl radiated purpose. "Young lady," the judge said kindly, crouching down to her eye level, "this is a private proceeding in a courthouse. Where are your parents? How did you get past security?" The girl stepped forward without hesitation, her small chin raised with the kind of determination that reminded Marcus of his own mother when she was fighting for something important. "My name is Sophie Chen. I'm 7 years old, and I live in Millbrook Valley." She looked directly at Marcus with those penetrating dark eyes. "Mr. Wellington, you don't remember me, but 3 years ago you saved my life, and now I'm here to save yours." Eleanor gasped softly, her hand flying to her throat. Marcus stared at the child, something stirring in the depths of his memory, a flash of a rainy night, headlights cutting through darkness, a child's terrified scream that had made his blood run cold. "That's absolutely impossible," Davidson, the plaintiff's attorney, interjected sharply, his face flushing red with indignation. Your Honor, this is clearly some kind of desperate publicity stunt orchestrated by the defense. I won't have this solemn proceeding turned into a three-ring circus by a child who's obviously been coached. But Sophie ignored him completely, her focus entirely on Marcus, as if the two of them were alone in the room. You were driving home late from the factory on Route 67. It was raining really hard, like the sky was crying. I ran into the road chasing my cat, Whiskers, because he got scared by the thunder and ran away from our trailer. Your car almost hit me, but you stopped just in time. The memory came flooding back like a dam bursting in Marcus's mind. He remembered now the terrifying moment when his headlights had illuminated the small figure darting across the dark, rain-slicked road, the screech of his brakes on wet pavement, his heart hammering as he realized he'd missed hitting her by maybe 3 feet. "You got out in the pouring rain," Sophie continued, her voice growing stronger, "and you weren't angry at all. You were just worried about me. You helped me look for Whiskers, and we found him hiding under Mrs. Patterson's front porch, scared and shivering." More details rushed back, the girl's tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks, her desperate search for her orange tabby cat, and how Marcus had spent nearly an hour in the storm helping her, ruining his expensive suit and getting completely soaked. "Sophie," he whispered, the name and the night coming back to him now in vivid detail. "You were crying because you thought Whiskers was gone forever, and you kept saying your mum would be so sad because he was all you had left of your daddy." She nodded, a small, sad smile breaking across her serious face. "You bought me hot chocolate from the gas station and drove me home in your fancy car to make sure I was safe. You even gave Whiskers some of your sandwich. You were so kind to me when you didn't have to be." "This is all very touching," Davidson said impatiently, glancing at his expensive watch. "But what does any of this childhood fairy tale have to do with—" "Because," Sophie interrupted, her young voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade forged in absolute certainty, "I know he didn't poison our water, and I know exactly who did." The courtroom fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the whisper of the air conditioning and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 20 floors below. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her fingers frozen over the keys as Sophie's words hung in the air like electricity before a lightning strike. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared at this small girl who had just claimed to hold the key to his innocence. Around him, he could sense the shift in the room's energy. Lawyers leaning forward, his parents gripping each other's hands, Judge Morrison's keen judicial instincts fully engaged. "Sophie," Judge Morrison said carefully, removing his reading glasses and giving the child his complete attention, "these are very serious accusations you're making. Are you absolutely certain you know what you're talking about? Because if you're mistaken, or if someone has told you to say these things—" "Nobody told me anything," Sophie interrupted with the fierce independence that only 7-year-olds possessed. "I saw it happen with my own eyes." She reached into her small, worn backpack and pulled out a manila folder that looked like it had been carefully protected for years. "My mom worked as a night cleaner at Wellington Industries. She's been really sick for 2 years now, the same sickness that lots of people in Millbrook got from the bad water." She opened the folder with careful, reverent hands, revealing photographs and documents that made Davidson's confident smirk falter and his face go visibly pale. "My mom never blamed Mr. Wellington, though, even when everyone else did. She knew he was one of the good ones because of how he treated people like us." Eleanor Wellington leaned forward, her maternal instincts engaged by this brave child. "Sweetie, where is your mother now? Is she here with you?" Sophie's expression grew solemn. "She's in the hospital. The poison in the water made her really sick, and she can't work anymore. But before she got too sick to think clearly, she made me promise to keep these papers safe. She said someday they might be important." Jonathan Pierce stepped closer, his attorney's instincts recognizing the potential significance of whatever evidence this child carried. Every successful lawyer learned to recognize game-changing moments, and the electricity in the air told him this was one of them. "Sophie, what exactly did you see?" he asked gently. Sophie pulled out a photograph, grainy and taken from a distance, with what appeared to be an old phone camera, but clear enough to show two men in the Wellington Industries laboratory complex. One was dumping the contents of several industrial barrels into what appeared to be the main water treatment system, while the other stood watch by the door. "I took this picture with my mom's old phone 3 years ago," Sophie said, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she continued. "It was the same night you helped me find Whiskers, Mr. Wellington. I was supposed to stay in the break room while Mom worked, but I got scared when the thunder started getting really loud." She pulled out a second photograph, this one showing the faces of the men more clearly. Marcus's blood turned to ice water in his veins as he recognized one of them immediately. "I went looking for my mom, and that's when I saw them dumping those big containers of yucky-smelling stuff into the water machines. I didn't know what they were doing, but it looked wrong, like when kids do bad things and try to hide it from grown-ups." The man in the photograph was Craig Hendricks, Marcus's vice president of operations and someone he'd trusted completely. Someone who'd been with Wellington Industries for 15 years, who'd been like a mentor when Marcus first joined the company, who'd helped him develop the very environmental technologies that were supposed to revolutionize industrial waste processing. "The scary man who was watching the door, he saw me taking pictures," Sophie continued, her voice dropping to a whisper as she remembered her fear. "He got really angry and started chasing me, but I'm good at hiding. I ran to the big cleaning closet where Mom kept all her supplies, and I squeezed behind the mop bucket until she found me." Davidson was frantically shuffling through papers now, his earlier confidence evaporating as the implications of Sophie's evidence became clear. But Sophie wasn't finished with her revelations. "There's more," she said, reaching into her folder again. "Something that will prove everything." Sophie's small fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind elementary schools sometimes used for reading practice, with bright blue plastic casing and oversized buttons designed for children's hands. The device looked ancient by modern standards, but it appeared to be in working condition. "The night my mom got really sick," Sophie explained, her voice growing quieter as she approached the most difficult part of her story. "She woke me up at like 3 in the morning. She was crying and shaking, and she made me promise to keep this recorder safe no matter what happened to her." Judge Morrison gestured for everyone to remain silent as Sophie pressed the large red play button with both thumbs. The device crackled to life, filling the hushed courtroom with the sound of distant voices, industrial machinery humming in the background, and the unmistakable echo of a large indoor space. At first, the voices were indistinct, but as they grew closer to wherever Sophie's mother had hidden the recorder, the conversation became chillingly clear. "Told you this was getting too risky," came a voice that Marcus immediately recognized as Craig Hendricks, his trusted vice president and supposed friend. "Wellington's getting suspicious about the environmental reports. He's been asking too many questions about the filtration system outputs." A second voice, unfamiliar and gravelly with a slight accent, responded with cold calculation. "That's exactly why we need to accelerate the timeline and finish this job. Once we dump the rest of these chemical accelerants into the water system and make sure all the evidence points directly back to his precious filtration patents, Wellington Industries will be completely finished." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the devastating truth unfolded through the scratchy speaker of a child's recorder. His mother's hand found his shoulder, gripping so tightly he could feel her fingernails through his suit jacket. "My client doesn't care about the collateral damage to the local population," the gravelly voice continued, with sickening indifference. "Chen Corporation wants those environmental patents, and they're willing to destroy an entire community to get them." Once Wellington's bankrupt from the wrongful death lawsuits and criminal charges, they'll swoop in as the concerned corporate citizen, buying all the intellectual property at fire sale prices. Sophie's mother's voice could be heard faintly in the background, moving closer to wherever she'd hidden the recorder. Dios mío, what are these men talking about? What are they doing to the water? Hendrix's voice grew more animated, as if he was enjoying the details of their conspiracy. The beauty of it is that the kid's own environmental innovations will be what destroys him. We've been using his filtration system to concentrate and distribute the toxins more efficiently throughout the water supply. Every safety measure he designed is actually helping us poison more people faster. Nay, the recording continued for another 47 seconds, capturing horrifying details about forged environmental reports, bribed EPA inspectors, falsified medical studies, and a systematic plan to frame Marcus for mass environmental poisoning, all orchestrated to steal his family's revolutionary water treatment technology for a fraction of its true worth. When the recording finally ended, the courtroom remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Judge Morrison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. A gesture Marcus had learned during the trial meant the judge was processing something that would fundamentally change everything. "Sophie," the judge said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of what they'd all just heard, "how long has your mother been keeping this recording secret?" "Since she got really sick," Sophie replied, her voice smaller now, as if the magnitude of what she'd just revealed was finally hitting her 7-year-old mind. "She said she was scared to tell anyone because she thought the bad men might hurt us if they knew she heard them. But when she saw on TV last week that Mr. Wellington might go to prison for something he didn't do." She looked directly at Marcus, her young eyes filled with a moral clarity that shamed every adult in the room. "She said we couldn't let an innocent person suffer for other people's greed and evil. She said that's not what good people do, even when they're scared." In the 18 hours following Sophie's earth-shattering revelation, Marcus Wellington's world transformed as dramatically as it had when he first heard that devastating guilty verdict. Judge Morrison had immediately declared a mistrial and called for emergency federal intervention, while FBI agents were executing coordinated search warrants at Craig Hendricks' penthouse apartment, his offshore bank accounts, and Chen Corporation's headquarters in 3 different states. Marcus now stood in the sterile corridor outside room 314 of Millbrook Valley General Hospital, holding an enormous bouquet of white roses and yellow sunflowers that seemed pitifully inadequate for what he was about to face. Through the partially open door, he could hear Sophie's soft voice reading aloud from what sounded like a children's book about a brave little mouse who saved a kingdom. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to meet the woman whose courage and moral conviction had saved his life, his family's legacy, and his faith in justice. But she was dying because of the very crime he'd been falsely accused of committing. "Mr. Wellington." Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up with genuine joy when she saw him. She was wearing the same patched clothes as yesterday, but someone had braided her hair neatly, and she was carrying a small teddy bear that looked new. "Mama, he's here! The man who helped me find Whiskers!" Maria Chen struggled to sit up straighter as Marcus entered, but he quickly moved to prevent her from straining herself. Up close, the devastation was heartbreaking. This woman, who should have been in her prime at 34, looked decades older, her olive skin bearing a greyish pallor that spoke of systemic poisoning, her breathing laboured from damaged lungs, and her hands shaking from neurological damage caused by the industrial toxins that Hendricks had deliberately dumped into their water supply. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he set the flowers on her bedside table, "I don't have adequate words to thank you for what you and Sophie did. Your incredible courage didn't just save my life, it saved my family's honor and exposed a conspiracy that could have destroyed countless more innocent people." Maria's English was heavily accented but clear, her dark eyes reflecting the same moral strength Marcus had seen in her remarkable daughter. "You saved my Sophie first, Signor. 3 years ago in the rain, when you didn't know us, when we were nobody to you. I never forgot your kindness to my little girl." Marcus pulled up the visitor's chair, while Sophie climbed onto the narrow hospital bed beside her mother, careful not to disturb the IV lines that were delivering round-the-clock medication to combat the poisoning in Maria's system. "The FBI told me that Hendricks has been arrested along with 4 other conspirators," Marcus said. "Chen Corporation's executives are in federal custody, and their assets have been frozen pending investigation. But more importantly, the doctors say you're responding well to the new experimental treatment protocol. Wellington Industries is covering all medical expenses for every affected family in Millbrook Valley. It's the absolute least we can do." "That's not why we came forward, Signor," Maria said firmly, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about the principles that had guided her decision. "We didn't do it for money or revenge. We did it because the truth matters more than being afraid, because justice matters more than being safe." Sophie reached into her ever-present backpack and pulled out a new folder, this one filled with colorful crayon drawings. "I made these pictures for you while Mama was sleeping," she said proudly, showing Marcus detailed artwork depicting their first meeting. A tall man in a business suit helping a small girl search for an orange cat in the rain, both figures surrounded by hearts and rainbows. As Marcus looked through Sophie's artwork, each drawing more touching than the last, Maria continued, "6 months ago, lawyers came to our trailer. Expensive men in suits who offered us money, lots of money, to testify against you in court. They said you were responsible for poisoning our community, for making everyone sick." She coughed, a harsh, wet sound that spoke of permanently damaged lungs, and Sophie immediately handed her a cup of water with a bendy straw. "But I knew better, Signor. I saw how you treated the cleaning ladies, how you always said good morning and thank you when other executives pretended we were invisible. I saw how you worried about making the factory safer for everyone, not just the important people." "But I failed you," Marcus said, overwhelming guilt heavy in his voice. "If I had been more careful, more aware of what Hendricks was doing right under my nose, if I had investigated those security malfunctions more thoroughly—" "No!" Sophie interrupted with surprising firmness for a 7-year-old, her small hand reaching out to pat Marcus's arm with the confidence of someone far beyond her years. "Bad people did bad things because they chose to be bad. That's not your fault, and Mama says it's not right to blame yourself for other people's evil choices." Through the hospital window, Marcus could see news vans gathering like vultures in the parking lot. The story of the innocent millionaire and the brave little girl who saved him was already spreading across the country. But sitting here in this sterile room with 2 extraordinary people who had risked everything for truth, Marcus realized the real story was about something far more profound than his legal vindication. But as visiting hours ended and Marcus prepared to leave, neither he nor the Chen family had any idea that their ordeal was far from over. In a luxury hotel across town, Vincent Torres was making encrypted phone calls to Chen Corporation's shadow investors, reporting that their carefully orchestrated plan had been exposed and that more drastic measures would now be necessary to protect their billion-dollar conspiracy. 3 weeks after Sophie's revelation, Marcus thought the nightmare was finally over. The FBI had arrested Craig Hendricks and his co-conspirators. Chen Corporation's assets were frozen, and Wellington Industries was slowly rebuilding its reputation. But at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Marcus's world shattered again when his phone rang with devastating news. "Mr. Wellington?" The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Millbrook Valley General Hospital, and her tone immediately set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. "I'm calling about Maria Chen. She's taken a severe turn for the worse. The toxins have caused massive organ failure and—" her voice broke slightly. "We need you to come immediately. Sophie is asking for you." Marcus was dressed and in his car within minutes, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel during the 2-hour drive to Millbrook Valley. The experimental treatments had been working. Maria had been getting stronger, talking about maybe returning to work part-time, even planning Sophie's 8th birthday party next month. How could everything change so quickly? When he arrived at the hospital, he found Sophie curled up in a chair beside her mother's bed, still wearing her school clothes from the day before. Maria was unconscious, connected to a frightening array of machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. The strong, determined woman who had risked everything for truth now looked fragile and small beneath the white hospital sheets. "The doctors say the poison damaged her kidneys worse than they thought," Sophie said quietly, not looking up from the coloring book in her lap. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could see tear stains on her cheeks. "They tried everything, but her body is too tired to fight anymore." Dr. Mitchell approached them with the careful demeanor of someone who delivered terrible news regularly. "The industrial chemicals caused progressive organ damage that we couldn't detect until it was too late. We've made her as comfortable as possible, but—" She paused, looking at Sophie with infinite compassion. "It's a matter of hours now, not days." Marcus sat down beside Sophie, his heart breaking for this brave little girl who was about to lose the only family she had left. "Sophie, I want you to know that you and your mother are heroes. What you did, exposing the truth, saving innocent people, that took more courage than most adults ever show." Sophie finally looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with a maturity that no 7-year-old should possess. "Mama made me promise something before she got too sick to talk. She said if anything happened to her, I should give you this." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a sealed envelope with Marcus's name, written in Maria's careful handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about the conspiracy against him. Maria's words, written in her labored English, revealed that Chen Corporation's plan went far deeper than anyone had imagined. They hadn't just wanted to steal Wellington's patents, they had been planning to eliminate Marcus entirely once they had what they needed. The letter contained names, dates, and details about a secondary plot that would have resulted in Marcus's accidental death, making him a martyr while Chen Corporation positioned themselves as the heroes who would continue his environmental work. Maria had overheard plans for a car accident, carefully orchestrated to look like Marcus had been driving while distraught over the lawsuit. But the most chilling revelation was in the letter's final paragraph. "They know Sophie and I have evidence. They will come for us when they think it is safe. Please protect my daughter. She is all the family I have left, and she is the only witness who can prove everything." As Marcus finished reading, Sophie's small hand slipped into his. "Mama said you're a good man who keeps promises. Will you promise to keep me safe?" Looking into those trusting eyes, Marcus felt a responsibility unlike anything he'd ever experienced. But outside the hospital, Vincent Torres was watching from a stolen car, waiting for the perfect moment to silence the last witness forever. Maria Chen passed away peacefully at 6:23 a.m., just as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital window. Sophie held her mother's hand until the very end, whispering Spanish lullabies that Maria had sung to her as a baby. Marcus stood guard beside them, his heart breaking as he watched this incredible child say goodbye to her entire world. The funeral 3 days later was attended by hundreds of Millbrook Valley residents who had come to honor the woman who had risked everything to expose the truth. Marcus paid for everything: the service, the flowers, the small granite headstone that read, "Maria Elena Chen, beloved mother and hero." But no amount of money could fill the devastating hole left in Sophie's life. "What happens to me now?" Sophie asked as they stood beside the fresh grave, her small hand clutching the adoption papers that had been expedited through the courts. "Mrs. Patterson from next door said maybe I could live with her cousin in Albany, but I don't know them." Marcus knelt down to Sophie's eye level, his decision already made, despite the protests from his parents about the complications of suddenly becoming a guardian to a 7-year-old. "Sophie, if you want, you could come live with my family. We have a big house with lots of rooms, and you could have your own space. You could go to a good school, and you'd never have to worry about having enough food or a safe place to sleep." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. The first real tears Marcus had seen her shed since her mother's death. "But I'm not fancy like you. I don't know how to act around rich people. What if I embarrass you?" "You could never embarrass us," Marcus said firmly. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, and you saved my entire family. We would be honored to have you as part of our family, if that's what you want." Eleanor Wellington stepped forward, her maternal instincts fully engaged. Over the past weeks, she'd grown to love this remarkable child who had shown more courage and integrity than most adults. "Sophie, darling, we've already prepared a beautiful room for you. It has bookshelves and a window seat where you can read, and we can even get you a kitten if you'd like." Sophie looked back at her mother's grave one last time, then up at the Wellington family who stood ready to welcome her with open arms. "Mama always said that family isn't just about blood, it's about people who choose to love you even when they don't have to." But as they prepared to leave the cemetery, Marcus noticed a black sedan parked across the street that had been following them since they left the funeral home. His blood ran cold as he recognized the driver, Vincent Torres, the man whose voice had been on Maria's recording, the man who should have been in federal custody. Marcus quickly ushered Sophie and his parents toward their car, his mind racing. How had Torres escaped police custody? Why wasn't he in prison with the other conspirators? And most terrifyingly, what was he planning to do to eliminate the last witness to Chen Corporation's crimes? As they drove away, Marcus watched in his rearview mirror as the black sedan began following them at a discreet distance. The conspiracy that had destroyed his life wasn't over. It was entering its deadliest phase. And now Sophie, the innocent child who had saved him, was directly in the crosshairs of people who would kill to protect their billion-dollar secret. Marcus made a silent vow as he watched Sophie doze in the back seat, exhausted by grief and stress. He would protect this little girl with his life if necessary. She had saved him when he was lost. Now it was his turn to save her. But Torres wasn't working alone, and Marcus had no idea that the real mastermind behind the conspiracy was someone he'd trusted for years, someone who had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate every loose end that could expose the truth about Wellington Industries and the systematic murder of an entire community. The war for Sophie's life was about to begin. 2 weeks into Sophie's new life with the Wellington family, Marcus thought they had found a safe routine. Sophie was attending the prestigious Riverside Academy, where she was already impressing teachers with her intelligence and resilience. She had her own room in the family's Fifth Avenue penthouse, complete with the promised bookshelves and window seat, and she was slowly beginning to smile again. But at 3:15 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, everything went wrong. Marcus was in his office at Wellington Industries, reviewing the plans to rebuild their reputation and expand their environmental initiatives, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Riverside Academy, and Marcus answered with the casual confidence of a guardian dealing with routine school matters. "Mr. Wellington, this is Principal Anderson." The woman's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. Sophie didn't arrive for her after-school pickup. She was in her last class at 2:30, but when the car service arrived at 3, she was nowhere to be found. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. What do you mean she's missing? Where did she go? We've searched the entire school. Her teacher, Mrs. Roberts, said Sophie asked to use the bathroom during the last 15 minutes of class. When she didn't return, Mrs. Roberts went to check on her, but the bathroom was empty. The hallway security cameras show her leaving through the emergency exit that leads to the parking lot. Marcus was already grabbing his jacket, his mind racing through possibilities. Sophie was too smart to just wander off, too responsible to cause unnecessary worry. If she had left school voluntarily, something had terrified her enough to run. "Have you called the police?" Marcus asked, rushing toward the elevator. "We called them immediately, but they said she hasn't been gone long enough to file a missing persons report. Mr. Wellington, there's something else. The security guard said he saw a man in a black sedan talking to Sophie through the fence during lunch recess. When the guard approached, the man drove away quickly. Vincent Torres." Marcus's blood turned to liquid fear as he realized what was happening. Torres hadn't been trying to kidnap Sophie at school. He'd been threatening her, telling her what would happen to Marcus and his family if she didn't cooperate. Sophie, with her 7-year-old mind and enormous heart, had probably decided to sacrifice herself to protect the people who had given her a home. Marcus called his driver and then immediately phoned the FBI agent in charge of the Chen Corporation case. Agent Sarah Rodriguez answered on the second ring. "Agent Rodriguez, Sophie Chen is missing. I think Torres has her, or she's running because he threatened her." "That's impossible, Mr. Wellington. Vincent Torres died in federal custody 3 days ago. Apparent suicide, cyanide capsule hidden in a tooth. We assumed it was to avoid facing the death penalty for his role in the mass poisoning." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. If Torres was dead, who had been following them, who had been in that black sedan, and who had threatened Sophie enough to make her run? "Agent Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. Sophie wouldn't run unless she was trying to protect someone. She's the most responsible, caring child I've ever met. If she left school, it's because someone convinced her that staying would put people she loves in danger." "We'll issue an Amber Alert immediately," Rodriguez said. "But Mr. Wellington, if Torres is dead, then we're dealing with someone else entirely. Someone who knows about Sophie's testimony and sees her as a threat." As Marcus's car raced through Manhattan traffic toward Riverside Academy, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a single photograph that made his heart stop. Sophie, sitting in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, holding a piece of paper with today's date. She looked scared but unharmed. The follow-up message was brief and terrifying. "She's safe for now. Come alone to the address I'm sending, or the little hero who saved you will disappear forever. You have 2 hours." Marcus stared at the phone, realizing that the conspiracy against him had never really ended. It had just been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, the most innocent person in the entire nightmare was paying the price for his family's pursuit of justice. The address that appeared in the next message was for a warehouse in Queens, the same industrial district where Wellington Industries had once stored chemical supplies before Marcus had moved everything to more secure facilities. Someone who knew his business, someone who knew his family, someone who had been planning this for a very long time, was holding Sophie hostage, and Marcus was about to walk into a trap that would determine whether good or evil ultimately triumphed in this battle for an innocent child's life. The warehouse in Queens looked abandoned from the outside, its windows covered with plywood and its parking lot cracked with weeds growing through the asphalt. But as Marcus approached the building exactly 2 hours after receiving the threatening message, he could see subtle signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks, a security camera mounted discreetly above the main entrance, and the faint hum of electricity that indicated the building was far from empty. Marcus had ignored every instinct and FBI protocol by coming alone, but the message had been clear. Any sign of police involvement would result in Sophie's immediate disappearance. He couldn't risk this brave child's life, not after everything she had already sacrificed for truth and justice. The main door was unlocked, opening into a dimly lit corridor that led deeper into the warehouse. Marcus followed the path marked by subtle chalk arrows on the concrete floor, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air smelled of industrial chemicals and something else, fear. "Mr. Wellington." "Mr." The voice came from the shadows ahead, cultured and familiar in a way that made Marcus's blood freeze. "Right on time. I've always appreciated punctuality in business associates." A figure stepped into the circle of light, created by a single hanging bulb, and Marcus felt his world crumble around him. The man holding Sophie wasn't a stranger or some hired criminal. It was Jonathan Pierce, Marcus's own attorney, the man who had supposedly been fighting to prove his innocence for the past 3 years. "Hello, Marcus," Pierce said with a smile that held no warmth. "I imagine you're rather surprised to see me here." Sophie was sitting on a chair about 10 feet away, her hands zip-tied behind her back, but otherwise appearing unharmed. When she saw Marcus, her eyes filled with relief and terror. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He said he would hurt you and your family if I didn't come with him. He said he was your friend." "She's been remarkably well behaved," Pierce said conversationally, as if they were discussing a business meeting rather than a kidnapping. "Quite intelligent for a 7-year-old. She figured out rather quickly that I wasn't really trying to help you during the trial." Marcus felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. "You were working for Chen Corporation from the beginning. The trial, the evidence, the way every defense strategy seemed to backfire. You were sabotaging your own case." Pierce's smile widened. "Very good, Marcus, though it's actually more complex than that. I wasn't working for Chen Corporation. I was Chen Corporation's American legal representative. We needed Wellington Industries' environmental patents, but we also needed to discredit the technology so we could acquire it for pennies on the dollar. But Sophie's evidence exposed the whole conspiracy. Hendricks is in prison. Chen Corporation is finished. Chen Corporation was always expendable," Pierce interrupted. "A shell company designed to take the fall when the time came. The real corporate entity behind this operation has been planning for your family's destruction for 15 years, ever since your father refused to sell Wellington Industries to us." Marcus's mind raced as the true scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't about stealing patents or even about money. This was about revenge against his family for some perceived slight that went back over a decade. "Your father cost us billions when he chose environmental innovation over profitable exploitation," Pierce continued. "So we decided to destroy his legacy, his son's future, and his family's reputation all at once. The poisoning of Millbrook Valley was just the opening move." Sophie spoke up suddenly, her young voice carrying surprising steel. "You're a bad man who hurts innocent people. And bad people always lose in the end, because good people fight harder when they're protecting someone they love." Pierce's expression darkened as he looked at the child who had already ruined one elaborate scheme. "Yes, the little hero. Unfortunately, heroes often die young, especially when they know too much." Marcus stepped protectively toward Sophie, his decision crystallizing. Whatever happened next, he would not let this innocent child pay the price for his family's enemies' twisted revenge. But as Pierce reached into his jacket, Marcus realized that the final battle for justice was about to begin, and only one of them would leave this warehouse alive. "You know, Marcus," Pierce said, pulling a gun from his jacket with practiced ease, "the irony of this situation is quite poetic. The child who saved you is about to be the reason you die. I've spent 3 years destroying your reputation, your business, and your family's legacy. Now I get to eliminate you both and pin it on a tragic murder-suicide driven by your guilt over the environmental disaster." Marcus raised his hands slowly, his mind racing for any advantage. The warehouse was enormous, filled with shadows and potential cover, but Sophie was zip-tied to a chair 10 feet away, too far for him to reach before Pierce could pull the trigger. "Why?" Marcus asked, genuinely trying to understand the depth of hatred that would drive someone to such elaborate revenge. "What did my family ever do to you that justified destroying an entire community?" Pierce's eyes flashed with old anger. 15 years ago, your father had the chance to sell Wellington Industries to Meridian Global, my real employer. The buyout would have made your family richer than you could imagine, and it would have given us control of the most promising environmental technology in the world. But instead, Pierce continued, his voice growing more bitter, your self-righteous father decided that profit wasn't as important as environmental stewardship and corporate responsibility. He cost Meridian Global a fortune and set back industrial development by decades. Marcus felt a flash of understanding. Meridian Global was one of the largest industrial conglomerates in the world, with a reputation for prioritizing profits over environmental concerns. His father's refusal to sell hadn't just been a business decision. It had been a moral stand that prevented dangerous technology from falling into the wrong hands. "So you spent 15 years planning this revenge?" Marcus asked, trying to buy time while looking for any opportunity to protect Sophie. "I spent 15 years becoming your family's most trusted advisor," Pierce corrected. "Building a reputation, gaining access to your business secrets, positioning myself to destroy you from within when the time was right. Craig Hendricks was just a pawn, a greedy fool who thought he was stealing patents for Chen Corporation when he was actually gathering evidence for your destruction." Sophie spoke up suddenly, her young voice cutting through Pierce's monologue. "You made my mama sick. You made all those people sick just to hurt Mr. Wellington's family. That's not just wrong. That's evil." Pierce turned his attention to Sophie, his expression growing colder. "Your mother should have minded her own business instead of playing hero, just like you should have stayed quiet instead of bringing that recording to court." "She was protecting innocent people," Sophie said with fierce pride. "That's what good people do. They protect others even when it's scary." Marcus saw his chance as Pierce's attention focused on Sophie. The little girl was deliberately provoking their captor, drawing his focus away from Marcus. Even zip-tied to a chair, facing a man with a gun, she was still trying to help save the day. Marcus dove to his left just as Pierce spun back toward him, the gun firing with a deafening crack in the enclosed space. The bullet sparked off a metal support beam where Marcus's head had been a split second earlier. Rolling behind a stack of old equipment, Marcus shouted, "Sophie, tip your chair backward if you can. Get down." The brave 7-year-old immediately understood, throwing her weight backward so the chair crashed to the floor, giving her some protection from Pierce's line of fire. Pierce fired twice more, the bullets punching through the equipment Marcus was hiding behind. "This just makes it more interesting," Pierce called out. "But you're only delaying the inevitable. I have all the time in the world, and you have nowhere to run." Marcus knew Pierce was right. The warehouse had only one exit, and Pierce was positioned between them and freedom. But Sophie had taught him something important about courage. Sometimes the only way to win was to risk everything for what mattered most. And right now, nothing mattered more than getting this innocent child home safely. "Pierce!" Marcus shouted, preparing to make his move. "You want revenge against my family? Then come and get it!" The final confrontation that would determine Sophie's fate was about to begin. Marcus burst from his hiding place with a roar of pure determination, charging directly at Pierce, who was reloading his weapon. The element of surprise gave Marcus precious seconds, enough time to tackle Pierce around the waist and send them both crashing into a stack of empty chemical barrels. Pierce was older, but desperate. fighting with the vicious intensity of a man who had spent 15 years planning this moment. They rolled across the concrete floor, Pierce trying to bring his gun to bear, while Marcus fought to keep the weapon pointed away from Sophie. "You can't win," Pierce gasped as they struggled. "Even if you kill me, Meridian Global will never stop hunting your family. They'll destroy everyone you care about, just like they destroyed that worthless cleaning woman." The mention of Maria Chen filled Marcus with righteous fury. This man had poisoned an entire community, murdered an innocent woman, and traumatized a 7-year-old child, all for corporate revenge and greed. Marcus managed to slam Pierce's gun hand against the concrete floor, sending the weapon skittering away into the shadows. But Pierce pulled a knife from his ankle holster, slashing at Marcus's face with desperate precision. "Sophie!" Marcus shouted as he dodged the blade. "Can you reach your backpack?" The clever girl, still zip-tied but lying on her side after tipping the chair, managed to twist around until she could reach the small backpack that had fallen nearby. "What do you need?" "Your emergency whistle, the loud one your mum gave you." Sophie understood immediately. Every child in New York was taught to carry emergency whistles, and Maria had made sure Sophie always had hers. With her hands still bound, Sophie managed to get the whistle to her mouth and blew with all the force her small lungs could muster. The piercing shriek echoed through the warehouse and out into the Queens Industrial District. Marcus had been hoping some security guard or late-working employee might hear it, but the response was better than he could have imagined. Within seconds, the warehouse doors burst open and FBI agents flooded in, their weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Agent Rodriguez led the charge, having tracked Marcus's phone GPS when he failed to check in as promised. Pierce made one last desperate lunge with his knife, but Marcus caught his wrist and twisted until the blade dropped. As FBI agents swarmed around them, Pierce's expression shifted from rage to resignation. "This isn't over," Pierce said as they handcuffed him. "Meridian Global has resources you can't imagine. They'll find another way." Agent Rodriguez helped Marcus to his feet, while other agents carefully freed Sophie from her restraints. The little girl ran straight to Marcus, throwing her arms around his waist and holding on as if she would never let go. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to check Sophie for injuries. "I'm okay," Sophie said, though her voice was shaky with delayed shock. "I knew you would come for me. Heroes always save the people they love." As they walked out of the warehouse into the evening sunlight, Marcus realized that Sophie was right about heroes, but she had it backward. She was the one who had saved him, not just from false accusations and financial ruin, but from a life where he might never have learned what real courage looked like. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the garden of the Wellington family's Hamptons estate, watching Sophie play with her new kitten, an orange tabby she had named Whiskers the Toon in honor of the cat that had brought them together. The legal battles were finally over. Meridian Global's conspiracy had been fully exposed, and Wellington Industries was stronger than ever. But more importantly, Marcus had learned that family wasn't about blood or money or social status. It was about choosing to love and protect the people who mattered most, even when that choice required sacrifice. Sophie looked up from playing with her kitten and waved at Marcus, her smile bright with the joy of a child who had found her place in the world. In that moment, Marcus knew that no matter what challenges the future brought, they would face them together as a family built on love, truth, and the unshakable courage of a 7-year-old girl who had saved them all. The innocent millionaire had been redeemed, but more importantly, an orphaned child had found her home. And sometimes that was the most important victory of all.